I saw a video about the Genies and how they'll probably end up on a lot of teams. Isn't that kind of the same thing we had in Regulation C with Fluttermane being on so many teams and people still got to play around it? See, the issue with Genies, that's a great question, by the way. The issue with Genies being on the same team and like them being everywhere in the meta being dominant is that you cannot catch them in this game. And that for some Genies like the Enamoris, you have to catch them in a different game and you can't know exactly what their IVs are, and you need very specific low IVs to be able to play Enamoris correctly in both forms. And you can't know what those IVs are until you transfer over like a beaten file of Arceus, right? So they're basically making pay to win. Versus Fluttermane, you can go catch 30 Fluttermanes. You can go into Union Circle and catch Fluttermanes in other people's games, right? So yeah, it's not just like, I'm not saying like, oh, these are broken, I hate it. It's like, no, these are really strong and like you can't play without them, but you also like can't get them unless you fork out money for people, right? That's not a good thing. You have to have Regieleki, Urshifu, Cresselia, horses. There's so many legendaries, yeah, that are all in other games. You know, that was the issue with that. The issue also isn't that the Genies don't have counterplay either, right? I want to get this, I guess I'll like explain my thought process a little more. There are things that are like overtuned and there are things that are overpowered in various games. You know, you can talk about like League of Legends or Counter-Strike or Smash Brothers or even card games like Yu-Gi-Oh! I've used this analogy before, but you guys remember Yu-Gi-Oh? Do you guys remember the card Dark Hole? It said like, send every monster on the field to the graveyard, both yours and your opponent's. It came out in the very first set. It was in the starter decks. It's a good card. It's been on the ban list before. It's basically just a board wipe. Now, there's also another card that came out in the very first set that's called Regeki. Now, Regeki only KOs your opponent's monsters. And Regeki has been on the ban list more times than Dark Hole. I don't know currently which one or how many of them are even on the ban list anymore or not. But back in the day, Regeki was way too overtuned. The amount of value that you got for using that card basically made it so the amount of value without the cost. The cost of Dark Hole says you can't have a developed board state yourself because you're wiping it, right? So there's a cost to that card, which balances it. There's not that same type of cost with Regeki. And so let's talk about the Genies. They bring basically what 3 to 4 other Pokemon do all packed into one. Like Landorus has like AoE, 100% accuracy checking moves that can burn with Intimidate, amazing typing, good speed tiering. That's cracked, right? Tornadus has Prankster Tailwind faster than any other Prankster Tailwind setter. Can Prankster taunt other Tailwind setters as well as other things. It gets AoE moves that can have additional speed control. It gets access to so many different things. Thundurus, both Thundurus forms are good. The Prankster one's good. The Voltobzor one's still good in this format. And so you can see how, like, why would you run, like, why would you run a Hisuian Braviary when you could just run a Tornadus? Why would you run, like, I'm trying to think of, like, a bad ground type. Why would you run a bad ground type when you could just run a Landorus? Or even a bad flying type? Or even a bad Intimidator? Why would you run, like, a Crocodile? Crocodile's a good example, which is actually a good Pokemon that has, like, world's top cuts behind it. Why would you run Crocodile in a form where you can run Landorus? Why would you run Garchomp when you can run Landorus? Why would you run, you know, a Kilowatriel over a Thundurus? Or why would you even use like a Zapdos over a Thundurus at that point? And so you see how these Pokemon tend to like invalidate the effect that other Pokemon can have in the meta because these Pokemon do the same job as those Pokemon as well as like 3 to 4 other things at better speed tiers with better bulk and have better tools. And so the issue now stems, it's not that there's a problem with them being broken, it's that they're not in the game, right? I don't know if you guys remember, but back in the day, the excuse that the Pokemon Company used to have for like why you couldn't use like Shaman or Darkrai or XYZ Pokemon in competitive like official events, Mew for example was one, was because you couldn't catch it in the game. Those are event Pokemon and they didn't want to make it so like people that didn't have those games like couldn't play. They wanted everyone to be able to play fairly. That's what they said from like 2014 all the way through to actually when they started allowing those Pokemon to be legal in the end of Sword and Shield. So now they're going back on that and saying like, okay, all these Pokemon illegal, you like totally have to use them and like you totally can't get them in this game. If there was a way to catch even one copy of like Landorus in this game, or Urshifu or Regieleki or anything like this, this wouldn't be an issue. But they're forcing a power creep and basically forcing you, if you want to compete, right? You can play ladder with anything. The team we were using today has 4 starters and a Goldengo Murkrow. No legends, mostly starters. You can still technically work on ladder, but you really wouldn't be able to get to like a day 2 at a regional, or even like top cut a serious best of 3 open team sheet event without actually having some of these Pokemon, in my opinion. Unless you want to play with like both hands high behind your back, like up the creek without a paddle, all those sort of, analogies, right? So the cost for these legendaries, there's no cost other than the cost you're going to be paying for buying the DLC and all the other games you have to transfer. And so it's just unfortunate, It's just unfortunate. Does that make sense? Does everyone agree with me? We'll open up a discussion. Like, what do you guys think? What do you guys think? It's just unfortunate. One thing that we talked about in the comments section of the video where I talked about the Genies was, in Sword and Shield, we had that game for like 3 years, and we didn't get like the restricted, like forced to use legendary meta. Like you were forced to use them until like the last year of that game, right? And so most of the casual players had already played what they wanted with Pokemon, they played the DLC, they had a good time, and they moved on to other games. We had already lost like that big surge of new player growth that you get at the start of the game. The issue that we're having here is that we're going to be losing all those players that just don't like to play with legendaries, or don't have them and can't get them, and are frustrated because they feel invalidated, and they're moving on to other games within the first year of the game coming out. We're basically taking the kneecaps off of our own competitive scene. There's not going to be nearly as many new players going into like the twilight of Scarlet and Violet as there normally would be, because like they're not going to have a shot. Yeah, if you could catch them in the DLC, I think that would make it much better. But the thing is, it's like these will be legal before the DLC comes out. So like a lot of these new players are going to have to learn how to play the format without legendaries. You're basically putting the newer players at a humongous disadvantage. I only got the DLC in Sword and Shield, so once I have the only one Urshi and Horse, it's pretty frustrating. Yo, I agree. It's super frustrating. It's not... See, the thing is, like, you can say they should just clear Sword and Shield and get them real quick. It's easy. But, like, people don't do that. They just don't, I also don't want to push an agenda that says, like, you guys need to use XYZ Pokemon because it's so good, when, like, it's obviously a meme, Like, I feel like with my content, most of my active viewers know that the teams that I make are made to be, like, fun. Look at this cool combo. It's a meme. It's a really good meme. Like, that's the whole point, I have good teams every once in a while. Like, I go to regionals and stuff like that. But, I'm not your James Beck. I'm not your Joe UX9. I would definitely like throw for content in any situation, trying to do something funny, than like trying to get like a W for a ranked ladder game that I don't care about. Are there any viable sand teams? It depends on what format. Are you looking at Reg C or Regulation D? I think Regulation D might actually have some cool stuff, because a lot of the Mons, like Hisui and Arcanine in sand, might actually be kind of cool with like the sand boost to it. Yeah, I feel we used to have formats for a whole year. We used to have formats for a whole year, and I was super okay with that. I talked briefly in a video about my thoughts on the formats changing every like 3 to 4 months, and how for myself personally, it's really demoralizing having the formats change every few months. Not just because like I have to make content and I feel like I'm out of control of the content when I don't know what the formats are changing to, and they don't actually have concrete dates when they tell you they're going to announce these things. They kind of just drop it at like midnight, and then like it could potentially brick like a whole week's worth of content you had planned. Or coaching sessions or other plans that like I have as the content creator. So I'm not a big fan of that. But also, when we had formats for a whole year, they would announce all the regionals in like August or October, right? So for example, like let's say the regional you want to go to is in like July of next year. You could still play the format all year and like work on a team and fine tune it and see how it adapts to the meta and actually play the game with the format that you want. But the way the rules work now, when they announce the regionals, for example, like, the end of the season regionals like Wisconsin that's happening, and Fresno, and even like NEIC, if you could only go to those, but you see that they just get announced back in like August or October of the year before, you're kind of just left twiddling your fingers, because anything that you're practicing right now won't be the format then. It doesn't get you like any sort of like experience other than understanding what that meta is, which yes has an effect on like a future meta, but you can tell how different Regulation like Series 1, 2, and Regulation C were from Regulation D. They're completely different formats with completely different strengths, and I don't want to be like the asshole here, but like you're almost building bad habits, like forcing yourself to adapt to a format that won't be the format that you're practicing for an event. And so there's no way to actively practice for an event that's like 6 to 8 months away because you don't know the format and there's nowhere to practice for it. So it's that, in my opinion, is super demoralizing. And if I were to put myself in like a newer player's perspective who like could only really go to the regional that's next to them, that would make me not play this game. Or at the very least not play this game until it was time to go to my regional. And then what, am I not playing the game for like 6 months out of the year? Like, that's not like conductive to like player growth, in my opinion. I'll read this comment. I was brand new to VGC. This is the first game I tried grinding myself to Master Ball tier. I was super proud of myself. Might not be a big deal to others, but they brought in the Paradox Pokemon, then the Ruins. I was like, wow, this is happening so fast. I have to keep relearning so much. I mean, that's the good thing though. There is one good thing about that, right? Is once you relearn all this stuff, it's going to be, there's nothing new in Pokemon, right? Bundle and Flutter aren't like new ideas. Flutter means just like basically a weaker Shadow Rider and a stronger Spectrier. Yeah, Bundle is just like a Scarfmon. It's a Scarfmon that has a little bit more like fluidity behind it. With like, it's basically just like an ice type Regieleki. There are very similar things that happen with every single mon. Like Great Tusk is basically just like a bad Landorus, right? Without Intimidate. Like things kind of all go together. So what I'm trying to say is like once you learn these things, you'll be able to realize like patterns and like other playstyles. And so when you see a new Pokemon, you're not going to have to learn everything about that Pokemon. You're just going to have to compare it to something you already know and then play it like that, and you'll realize how to play that Pokemon's playstyle. There's nothing like new in Pokemon. Like even when there is something new, it's just a fusion of like two other things that normally didn't work together. So for example, like Armarouge, brand new Pokemon. Everyone liked it. It could have like Flash Fire or Weak Armor. It could get Expanding Force, Trick Room, Wide Guard. That's just like fusing a Trick Room setter and a Trick Room abuser into one Pokemon. It's like giving Heatran, Expanding Force, and Trick Room. That's basically what Armarouge is. So it's just a culmination of ideas. But that's my take on these sort of things, and I feel bad for like newer players that don't have like the resources and don't have like the time or don't know like where to practice for this stuff. Like it would be so hard, as a newer player. Like I completely understand. What is Zacian? Zacian is just a fast Mega Mawile. Like I'm not lying. Like it's what it is. It's just a fast Mega Mawile. If you take Mega Mawile and you just gave it a lot of speed, same typing, roughly like same type of like attack multiplier type of thing. So it's just fast Mega Mawile. And then what is Mega Mawile? It's just a better Bisharp. You know what I mean? Like, so you see what I mean? Like they both use Sucker Punch. They both have knockoffs sometimes. They both go for steel attacks. They're both weak to ground. It's the same. Like they're roughly the same. It's the same play style. It's all built around typing and like moves that they use. Like, for example, Hands is like a standard like Hariyama fake out user, right? But in this format, Hands is played more like a Mega King. People are using like new Chalk with like Iron Hands, like Landorus, Amoonguss, Crest, stuff like that. I think we dope if Pokemon would patch the game with buffs and nerfs like every 2 months. See, I don't think that's not a Pokemon thing, right? I've said it before. Pokemon's not Smash Brothers. It's not League of Legends. Buffs and nerfs. This is a perfect example. These Genies got buffed, and it's literally going to break the game. So I'd rather we don't have buffs and don't have nerfs and just like literally like let us play the game, Right? So it's like I don't think that they're not good enough at buffing things to not break the game when they do it. What I think is the way they've been doing it is they slightly nerf overtuned things every gen, which is good. Xerneas gets slightly nerfed. Talonflame gets slightly nerfed. Mega Kang, Mega Sally all been slightly nerfed. Smeargle has been tuned. Even Regieleki got slightly nerfed. These are all like very slight things, but you don't ever need to buff anything. The buff is the way that buffs work is like for people to say, I want old Pokemon that aren't as good or bad Pokemon to be buffed. Not everything can be good. The time to use those Pokemon is when the format is brand new, right? That's when those Pokemon are at their best because it's such a smaller dex. So things like Oinkologne. I used Oinkologne and like Mabostiff in Series 1, and I used on the ladder, and it was fun, and they were totally usable. Can they hold now? Hell no. That's not their time. Like they're like a relic of the past. It's just like if we were playing League of Legends, like certain champions like fall out of the meta, and just like those things do. How did Genies get buffed? Oh, they got new moves that like break the game. But how don't you get bored playing with the same reg for like 6 months? Because the meta develops. So right now, how many of you guys, show of hands, what gen did you start playing competitive VGC in? What game did you start playing? I want to know. I want to actually know, because that's a good question as well. How don't you get bored playing the same reg for like 6 months? Because there's an answer to this. So people started playing this gen, Sword and Shield, right? Gen 8, cool. Everyone's Sword and Shield Gen 8. This makes so much sense. Okay, so when we had formats for a whole year, what would happen is, you know the good players, you know the Wolf Glix, Ashton Cox, Aaron Zhang, James Beck, all those guys, they would take a team and it would do well in an event. And then the next event, there'd be like a slight counter team to that one. And there'd be a slight counter team to that one, and a slight counter team to that one, to a point where that team that originally did really well at the start of the season isn't really usable anymore. And we've evolved the meta over the course of like 3 months. And then now we have like a middle of the meta, right? A middle of the year meta. And then like that team gets phased out into near the end of the meta. The teams that were originally good at the start kind of come back in because the checks for them are fading away. It's like a huge triangle or circle of like things that check each other, and the meta evolves because there's enough time for one to develop. What happens right now is, because we only have these formats for like 1 to 2 months, is one team gets really good and every single person says, I'm going to use that. And then they go to like their 2 regionals because the format's only like a month and a half, and there's never ever a reason to innovate. Ever. You can just use your glue eating lead or your dozo or whatever, and like that's fine. There's no reason to innovate or actually change EV spreads or mess with your speed tiers, because you're only using this team for like 1 or 2 events, period. There's no reason to diversify or like evolve the game, which sucks. You know the year that Wolf won the World Championships, 2016, that would not have been possible if we had just had 2016 for like 3 months. There was a whole year of like Big Six and things that check Big Six and fail to check Big Six, and like super hard check Big Six that lose to other stuff, to where Wolf was able to come up with that version of Ray Ogre, which was like already like a really greedy comp that like only really checks Big Six, because like the way it worked was Big Six beat everything. And yeah, Ray Ogre could beat Big Six, but it lost to Zern. Right? And so Wolf was one of the only people to actually come up with a consistent Ray Ogre team that didn't lose to Zern and balance it out like the freaking Avatar, right? And that wouldn't have been possible if like the format was just 1 to 2 months, because everyone would just play Big Six for a month and that would have been remembered as the worst format ever, which like it totally was for like 8 months, but we wouldn't have had the innovation and the growth that actually stems players to become better players, learn more about matchups, and learn how to solve problems as opposed to just like ignoring them and hoping they go away and begging for buffs and nerfs and changes and new Pokemon. It's up to the players to dictate how things work in a format where we have a whole year to do that. All right, does that make sense? You say 6 months of Series C. You don't actually know that though. Like if it was 6 months, so I'm not the only person that's talked out about this. There's been a lot of players that say they don't innovate because the formats are so short. Right? So it's bad right now. Like if we have Regulation C, because like we've had it for a couple months, that's because we know there's an end, right? That was coming up when it was announced. It was announced for a 3-month format, right? So there's no reason for players to like innovate past like finding the one thing that they like and are comfortable with and putting like slight adjustments to that. But imagine if it was a whole year, and after you did that thing with your team, maybe you're like 1 or 2 events, you'd have to change. You'd be forced to change if you still wanted to go to events. Right? So it's like, there's been a lot of players that have talked about how like there's no reason to like overanalyze, or after your tournament, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I liked also like playing a whole year-long format. I liked it a lot because like you knew, like I was talking about at the start, you knew exactly what you wanted to practice for whatever event you were going to. Case in point, like, you know, when they announced like Wisconsin Regionals and NAIC and even the World Championships at the start of the season, no one knew the format. So if you were someone that started playing at the end of Sword and Shield or even the Scarlet and Violet and you said, I want to go to the World Championships this year, well, do you want to go to the World Championships in Regulation D? Because that's what we're going to have. Would you have committed the resources, which is thousands and thousands of dollars, to go to the regionals all over the world, because you have to go to internats as well, to potentially get an invite to play in this format that you didn't know or couldn't know and have no way to prepare for? No, that's literally not like smart, right? Most people that would be committing those thousands and thousands of dollars to do that, you'd want to be a little bit more in control of like knowing the format if you're going to be committing that much stuff to it. At least in my opinion.